I grew up in a town that didn't have a name on most maps, just a gas station, a closed lumber mill, and miles of forest that everyone treated like an ocean. Beautiful to look at, deadly if you went too far in. The woods started right behind our backyard fence, a thick wall of pine and birch where the light died faster than it should. My dad used to say the forest was honest land, meaning it didn't hide what it was. You got lost, you froze, you died. Simple. But the older locals never talked about it that way. They talked about sounds, about things that walked when the wind didn't blow, about how sometimes dogs refused to track deer trails that cut too deep between the trees. I didn't believe any of that growing up. Fear felt like something invented to keep kids close to home. That changed the summer I turned 17, when my friend Caleb and I decided to camp past Miller's Ridge, farther than anyone our age had permission to go. We left late afternoon with cheap gear, 2 flashlights, a hatchet, and enough arrogance to make us feel invincible. The first few miles were normal, birds, insects, branches cracking under our boots. But after we crossed the dry creek bed, the forest changed in a way that's hard to explain unless you felt it yourself. It wasn't quieter. It was wrong. Like the sound had weight pressing on your ears. Even Caleb noticed. He kept turning around like someone was walking behind us, though there was never anything there. We joked about it, called it Blair Witch nerves, but neither of us laughed very hard. By the time we reached the ridge, the sun was already bleeding out behind the trees. We set up camp fast, built a small fire, and tried to act normal. That's when we heard the first call. It sounded like a deer at first, high, strained, but it held the note too long, like breath that never needed to end. Then it broke halfway through into something deeper, almost human, like a scream forced through an animal's throat. Caleb froze mid-sentence. We both listened. The call came again, closer this time, echoing through the trees in a way that made distance impossible to judge. Probably a fox, Caleb said, but he whispered it, like he didn't want the forest to hear him. Night fell fully after that. No moon. Just firelight and tree silhouettes that looked like figures standing shoulder to shoulder around our camp. Around midnight, our fire started dying, so I grabbed the flashlight to gather more wood. I didn't go far, maybe 30 yards, but the darkness out there felt thicker, like walking into cold water. That's when I smelled it. Rot, but not like a dead animal. Sweeter. Damp. Like something that had been buried and dug up more than once. I swung the flashlight around, and that's when I saw the tracks. They weren't fresh footprints in mud. There was no mud, just dry needles, but the ground looked pressed in long, narrow shapes, spaced too far apart to be human. The stride was wrong. Each impression deeper at the front, like whatever made them put weight on elongated toes or claws. I remember crouching down, trying to convince myself it was a trick of light. Then I heard breathing behind me. Slow. What? Close enough that I felt warmth on the back of my neck. I turned so fast I slipped, the beam jerking across the trees. Nothing. Just trunks and darkness. But the breathing didn't stop. Moved. Circled. Always just outside the flashlight's edge. I ran back to camp without the wood. Caleb saw my face and didn't even ask, he just grabbed the hatchet. We both heard it then, moving between the trees, heavy but careful, like it understood sound carried. Then it made that call again, but this time it tried to shape words inside it. Not clear words, more like someone remembering how language sounded without knowing how to use it. The closest thing I can compare it to is a parrot mimicking a scream. Our names came next. Not spoken. Stresh. Caleb. Oh, yeah. It didn't know pronunciation, just the rhythm it had overheard. Caleb started crying quietly, still gripping the hatchet. We fed the fire until it roared, thinking light would keep it back. For a while it did. We could hear it pacing beyond the glow, snapping branches, dragging something heavy across the ground. Then came the smell again, stronger, mixing with smoke until it burned my throat. At some point near 3 a.m., exhaustion hit me in waves. I must have drifted because the next thing I remember was silence. Total silence. No insects. No wind. The fire was nearly out. Caleb was gone. I thought he went to piss until I saw the ground where he'd been sitting. The dirt was torn up in long gouges, like something had pulled him backward by the legs. No scream. No struggle sounds I'd heard. Just drag marks leading into the trees where the light died. I grabbed the flashlight and followed before fear could stop me. The beam shook so bad it made the trees look like they were breathing. The drag trail went on longer than it should have, deeper into forest I didn't recognize. Then it stopped abruptly in a small clearing I swear hadn't been there before. In the center stood something tall and crooked, half hidden behind a birch trunk. At first I thought it was a person hunched over. Then it straightened. Its limbs unfolded, two long joints bending with a wet cracking sound. The skin looked stretched and pale like it had never seen sun, hanging loose in places as if it didn't fit the bones underneath. Its head tilted in short, jerky movements, studying me with eyes that reflected the flashlight like an animal's, but set too forward, too human. When it opened its mouth, the jaw split wider than it should, not dislocating but unfolding, revealing rows of thin, uneven teeth slick with something dark. And in a voice made of stolen sounds, it tried again to say my name while Caleb's flashlight flickered weakly on the ground beside its feet. It said my name like it was tasting it, testing how the shape of it felt in a mouth that wasn't built for speech. Yeah. The sound came layered, its voice underneath, wet and animal, and something else threaded through it like an echo that didn't belong to the forest. Caleb's voice. Faint. Strained. Like it was trapped somewhere deep in the creature's throat. My body locked. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't answer. The thing leaned slightly, studying me the way a curious predator studies something it hasn't decided how to kill yet. I remember noticing details that made it worse. The way its chest moved too slow between breaths, the way its fingers dragged along the birch bark leaving dark streaks, the way its knees bent backward just a few degrees more than a human should. Then Caleb's flashlight on the ground flickered again, the beam rolling across the clearing and lighting up something behind the creature. More drag marks. Several. Old ones. Some small. Some large. All leading to the same place where it stood. That's when fear finally broke the paralysis. I stepped back. The creature's head snapped toward the movement instantly, too fast, like frames missing from reality. It took one step forward into full light and I saw its face clearly for the first time, or what passed for one. The skin hung loose around the cheeks, stretched thin over a skull that looked slightly too big. The nose was flattened, almost dissolved into the face. But the eyes were wrong in a way that hit deeper than anything physical. They looked aware. Not animal aware, human aware. Watching, thinking, calculating. And inside the reflection of my flashlight I saw movement that didn't belong to the creature at all, like silhouettes shifting behind the pupils, shapes pressing outward as if more than one thing was looking through the same pair of eyes. It spoke again, clearer this time. He is here. The voice broke midway, dissolving into that deer-like scream. Then it reached down and lifted Caleb's flashlight in one hand. Its fingers were too long, bending around the metal like roots around a stone. It clicked the light on and aimed it directly at my face. I was blinded for a second. When my vision cleared, it was closer. I hadn't heard it move. The smell hit me first. Rot, damp soil, old blood. I stumbled backward and turned to run, but before I could take 3 steps I heard something crashing through the trees to my left, then to my right. Not one set of footsteps. Several. Fast. Surrounding. The forest that had been silent all night suddenly filled with movement, branches snapping in multiple directions. I realized then the worst possibility. I hadn't found the creature's hunting ground. I'd found where it brought things back. And it wasn't alone. I ran blind through the trees, following nothing but instinct and slope, hearing that stretched imitation of my name echo behind me from more than one throat now. Flashlight beams flickered between trunks, some on the ground, some held at wrong angles too high off the earth. At one point I glanced back and saw silhouettes pacing me between the trees, tall, crooked outlines moving in jerks instead of strides. One of them dropped low and sprinted on all fours for several seconds before rising again. I ran until my lungs tore, until the ridge incline vanished and the forest thinned slightly. That's when I heard Caleb. Clear. Close. Help me. I stopped instantly. The voice came from ahead, weak, shaking. Relief hit so hard it almost buckled my knees. I pushed forward toward it, calling his name. He answered again, a little to the right this time, then to the left. The realization came slow and sickening. It wasn't echo. It was moving the voice, throwing it, hurting me. I froze mid-step. The forest around me went silent again in that heavy, suffocating way. Then, directly behind my ear, Caleb's voice whispered perfectly, "Don't turn around." Warm breath touched my neck. I turned anyway. The creature stood inches behind me, towering, its jaw slightly open like it had been practicing the words. But now I saw something new. Its torso moved subtly under the skin, shapes pressing outward, sliding as if bodies were shifting inside it trying to get free. A handprint bulged briefly against its ribs from within before sinking back. Caleb's voice came again, but not from the mouth, from everywhere in the creature at once. "It keeps us." I stumbled back screaming. The thing lunged, not fast like an animal, but inevitable like gravity deciding direction. I swung the hatchet wildly, the blade catching its forearm. The impact felt wrong, like striking soaked wood. Dark fluid spilled, but it didn't react with pain. Only curiosity, tilting its head as if studying why I'd done it. Then the forest exploded with calls, dozens of those stretched screams answering at once, closing in. Adrenaline took over. I ran downhill without direction, branches tearing my arms, roots nearly breaking my ankles. Behind me the calls blended with human sounds, cries, fragments of words, laughter that wasn't laughter. I burst through the tree line just before dawn, collapsing near the old mill road. When I looked back, the forest edge stood still and empty like nothing had ever moved inside it. Search teams went in later that day after I got help. Dogs refused to track past the creek bed. One deputy swore he heard someone calling his name deeper in the trees even though we were all accounted for. They never found Caleb, or the camp, or the clearing. I went back once, months later, in daylight, with people who thought exposure therapy would help. We reached the ridge. There was no clearing beyond it. No drag marks. No tracks. Just endless trees. But as we turned to leave, I heard it faintly from far inside the forest. A call stretched too long, breaking halfway into something almost like my voice calling back. I don't go near the woods anymore. No one from town does after dark. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind is wrong, I smell that damp rot through my open window. And once, only once so far, I woke up to my phone recording audio by itself. When I played it back, there was only breathing at first. Slow. What? Close. Then two voices layered together trying to form the same word. My name. I didn't go into the forest because I was brave. I went because my uncle stopped answering his radio. He worked fire watch out past Klein Sector, the stretch of state woodland nobody liked patrolling because the access roads were half collapsed and the signal towers barely reached. He'd done that job 15 years and never missed a check-in once. So when dispatch couldn't reach him for 12 hours straight, they sent 2 rangers to his tower. They came back before sunset without him and without a clear explanation. Just said the ladder was down, the cabin door was open, and his truck was still parked there with the keys in the ignition. No signs of struggle. No tracks. Like he'd stepped out for air and dissolved. I drove up the next morning before they could lock the sector. Family privilege, I guess, or maybe guilt. He'd raised me more than my own dad had. The road in was worse than I remembered. Pines choked the sky, branches scraping my truck like fingernails the deeper I went. By the time I reached the tower clearing, the air felt stale, like it hadn't moved in hours. His truck was still there, dusted in pollen, driver door hanging open just like they said. The radio on the dash hummed with low static even though the battery should have been dead. I called his name out of habit and immediately regretted it. My voice sounded absorbed, swallowed by the trees instead of echoing. The tower ladder had indeed been lowered, but not neatly. It looked like it had been dropped fast, one hinge bent. I climbed anyway. Halfway up I noticed something carved into the wood rungs. Not initials, not symbols, just shallow vertical gouges repeating every few feet like someone had dragged something sharp upward while climbing. The cabin at the top was worse. Windows open. Coffee still in the mug, dried into a dark ring. His radio headset lay on the floor tangled in its cord like it had been ripped off mid-call. I picked it up and held it to my ear. Static at first. Then something underneath the static. Not a voice, not exactly. More like breathing fed through a broken speaker. Slow inhale. Longer exhale. I pulled the headset away instantly, but the sound didn't stop. It was coming from the forest below too, faint but synchronized, like the entire tree line was breathing in one shared rhythm. I climbed down faster than I meant to, nearly missing rungs. At the base I noticed his rifle leaning against the ladder. Safety off. One round missing. I followed the direction the barrel had been angled toward. There was a narrow game trail leading downhill into thicker growth. That's where I saw the first sign that something had gone wrong in a way no report had captured. The trees along the trail were marked at shoulder height with the same vertical gouges as the ladder, but deeper, fresher. Sap still wet, running like tears down the bark. I should have turned back. I didn't. The trail sloped into a basin where the forest floor turned soft with old needles and rot. That's where I found his radio. Not broken. Placed. Sitting upright against a stump like someone had set it there deliberately. It crackled the moment I got close. I didn't touch it at first. I just listened. Static, then my uncle's voice, faint and distorted. Don't answer it if it calls you back. The transmission cut. I grabbed the radio, shouting into it, but only the breathing came through again. Closer now, layered with a second sound underneath like teeth clicking slowly together. Then I heard movement off the trail. Not crashing. Careful. Something pacing parallel to me behind the trees. I turned but couldn't see it. Only glimpses of pale vertical shapes slipping between trunks where shadow should have been solid. I called out again, louder, anger overriding fear. Uncle Ray. The forest answered immediately. Ray. The voice came from deeper in, stretched thin, not quite matching his tone but close enough to punch panic straight into my chest. I backed toward the trail, but the ground felt wrong under my boots, springy like walking on layered moss too thick to be natural. When I looked down I realized it wasn't moss at all but compressed leaves packed so densely they'd formed a kind of mat, and embedded in it were objects. Rusted shell casings. A belt buckle. A cracked compass. Things dropped over years, maybe decades, all pressed into the same patch of earth like offerings. The pacing sound stopped. Silence fell so fast it rang in my ears. Then, from directly ahead, my uncle stepped out from behind a pine. Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly gave. He looked thinner, dirt smeared across his face, uniform torn at the sleeve, but alive. You shouldn't be here, he said, voice hoarse. I rushed toward him, but he didn't move to meet me. He just stood there, breathing too slow. That's when I noticed his eyes. They reflected light like an animal's even though there was no direct sun in the basin. We need to go, I said, grabbing his arm. His skin felt cold. Not cold like outside, cold like stone in shade. He didn't resist, but he didn't help either, letting me pull him up the trail. Halfway back to the tower clearing he finally spoke again, quieter. It learns your voices first. I stopped walking. What? He didn't answer. Instead he tilted his head slightly, listening to something I couldn't hear yet. Then I heard it too, footsteps behind us on the trail. Matching our pace exactly. When we stopped, they stopped. When we walked, they walked. I turned, expecting to see whoever had followed me in. The trail was empty. But the gouged tree marks along the bark were fresh now, sap still dripping, appearing higher than before, well above my head height. Don't look for it, my uncle said flatly. If you see it clearly, it knows you know. We kept moving. The tower clearing came into view through the trees, and I felt relief again until I saw the ladder. It was raised now. Slowly, deliberately, the hinge creaking as it lifted on its own toward the cabin door. I stared up, confused, until I heard the radio on my belt crackle. My own voice came through it, clear as if spoken live. "I'm at the tower. Where are you?" I froze. The voice repeated, slightly distorted this time. "I'm at the tower. Come up." I looked beside me to tell my uncle we needed to leave, but he wasn't looking at the tower. He was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Fear, yes, but mixed with recognition, like he'd just realized something too late. His grip tightened painfully on my wrist. Then he whispered, barely audible, "It only lets one walk out wearing the right voice." His fingers dug into my wrist hard enough to hurt, and I felt my stomach drop. That sentence wasn't random. That was something I'd said to him years ago, half joking, when he forgot to pick me up after school. My uncle heard it too. His grip tightened even more. "It uses what it hears," he whispered. "But it doesn't always know when the memory happened." Something shifted in the tree line behind the tower. I didn't see it fully, just a distortion like heat haze bending around a vertical shape too tall to be human. The bark on the nearest pine began splitting downward in those same gouges I'd seen on the trail, fresh sap spilling as if invisible claws were testing the wood. The radio changed voices. Now it was him. Perfectly him. "Kid, ladder's stuck. Come help me." The tone was so accurate I almost answered before remembering he was standing beside me. I looked up slowly. A silhouette stood inside the cabin doorway. Same height. Same hat shape, same stance, but it didn't move like a person balancing on a platform. It swayed slightly, like something unused to joints that bent forward instead of sideways. My uncle spoke without taking his eyes off it. "That's the third time it's warned me." My throat felt dry. "Third." He nodded faintly. "First time it just watched. Second time it tried my voice. Third time, he didn't finish." The figure in the tower leaned forward, gripping the railing. Even from that distance I could hear the breathing, the same slow inhale, longer exhale I'd heard through the headset. The radio on my belt squealed with feedback, then switched again. Now it was both our voices overlapping, trying to speak the same sentence in sync but falling out of rhythm. "Come up." The words stretched unnaturally at the end, breaking into that deer-like scream I hadn't heard until then but instantly knew didn't belong to any human throat. My uncle shoved me backwards suddenly. "Truck. Now." I didn't argue this time. We ran. Branches whipped at my face as we cleared the edge of the basin, boots slipping on loose needles. Behind us, the tower ladder slammed down violently, wood cracking on impact. Then came footsteps. Not pacing now, but charging, heavy impacts that shook the ground in uneven intervals like something running on limbs that didn't agree with each other. We burst into the clearing where the truck sat. I yanked the driver door open, fumbling the keys from the ignition where they'd been left. My uncle didn't get in. He stayed outside, rifle in hand, scanning the tree line. "Get it started," he said. "We leave together." I turned the key. The engine coughed but didn't catch. The radio on the dash roared to life with overlapping voices. Mine, his, dispatch operators, even strangers I didn't recognize, all layered into a chaotic chorus trying to form coherent sentences. The engine died again. "Start," he shouted. I tried again. This time it turned over. As I looked up in relief, I saw the trees behind him part. Not pushed, not broken, just bending away as something stepped forward that didn't fit between them. I never saw the full shape at once. My brain wouldn't let me. I saw height first, too tall, head nearly brushing low branches. Then limbs, long, jointed wrong, moving with careful curiosity rather than aggression. Its surface looked like layered bark and skin fused together, pale in strips, dark in others, as if it had grown out of the forest but borrowed textures from what it consumed. And its face, it wasn't fixed. It shifted slowly, features pressing outward beneath the surface like multiple masks trying to settle on the same skull. For a second it wore my uncle's face perfectly. then mine. Then something older, half-formed. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, studying us. Not hunting, deciding. My uncle raised the rifle but didn't fire. It doesn't fear bullets, he said under his breath. It fears being known. I didn't understand what that meant until he stepped forward away from the truck. "Ray," I shouted. He ignored me, eyes locked on the creature. "You want voices?" he said loudly, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Take mine." The creature's head tilted sharply. He kept talking, louder now, reciting things. His name, his birthday, memories out loud like he was reading his own life into the air. The radio in the truck went berserk, trying to record it all. The creature stepped closer, fascinated, its shifting face slowing as it tried to hold his features in place. He glanced back at me once. "When it learns me fully, it'll let you go." I realized then what he meant earlier. Only one walked out wearing the right voice because it didn't need duplicates. It replaced. "No." I jumped out of the truck, but he shouted me down. "Drive." The creature was right in front of him now, towering, its surface rippling as it absorbed every word he spoke. The forest around us began echoing his voice from multiple directions as it learned, practiced, perfected. I saw the moment it succeeded. Its face settled fully into his, eyes reflecting human awareness instead of animal shine. My uncle went silent mid-sentence. The creature inhaled slowly, like sealing the last piece in place. Then it spoke in his voice, perfect, calm, familiar. "You can go now, kid." My body refused to move. The thing smiled the way he used to, slight, reassuring, but the breathing underneath it was still wrong. My real uncle's body was still standing there too, but slack now, eyes unfocused like something had been emptied out of him. Survival finally overrode everything. I got back in the truck and drove. I didn't look in the mirror until I hit the main road miles later. When I did, the tree line at the forest edge held one figure watching me leave. Same hat. Same stance. He raised a hand and waved the way my uncle always did. Dispatch closed Klein sector a week later after structural hazards were reported. Officially, my uncle is listed missing. Unofficially, the fire watchtower radio still transmits sometimes on open frequencies. Rangers say if you're scanning late at night, you might hear a calm voice offering directions, weather updates, safety warnings. Helpful. Familiar. But if you stay on the line too long, the signal starts layering, your own voice repeating back to you slightly out of sync. I've heard it once. Just once. I shut the radio off when it said perfectly in my tone, "I'm at the tower. Where are you?" And through the static underneath, I could hear him breathing.